I'll now move on to discuss the individual sectors within the inventory. In terms of the agricultural sector, we saw the largest annual reduction in agricultural emissions of 4.6%. This is largely as a result of an 18% decrease in fertilizer nitrogen use, and a reduction in lime application. There was also a 2.1% reduction in methane from enteric fermentation and manure management. Overall, within the agricultural sector, emissions are 1.3% above those in 1990, and more specifically, methane emissions are now approximately 5% above those in 1990. As Laura alluded to earlier on, dairy cow numbers increased by 0.6% in 2023 above those in 2022. However, milk production overall reduced by 4.1%, with the average milk yield per cow reducing by 4.5%. In our latest inventory estimates, we've taken on board updates to the methane models for both our cattle herd and for our sheep herd, and this is part of overall ongoing inventory refinement, which is a normal part of inventory compilation. With respect to the non-dairy cattle herd, we've included additional disaggregation of production systems. This is as a result of taking on board data out of the ICBF database, which allows for more refined estimates of live weight and average daily weight gain. It also allows us to better track changes in slaughter age that have occurred in the past and indeed into the future, this being one of the measures in place in the Teagasc MAC and in the Climate Action Plan about reducing slaughter age, but also future-proofing our approach in terms of any changes in feed characteristics or indeed the use of feed additives, another important policy measure for the agricultural sector as we move into the future. In terms of the sheep flock, then similarly, we've now developed a Tier 2 approach in conjunction with Teagasc to estimate emissions from the sheep flock. Again, country-specific information on live weight gains, average daily weight gains, fecundity, mortality, lambing rates, etc. are being taken on board. As a result, over the period 2018 to 2023, which is the years of concern under the Climate Action Plan, this has led to an approximate 8.5 million tonne CO2 equivalent over that 6-period reduction. Over the period in 1990, this is over 700 kilotons per annum. In terms then of the profile of the different gases within the agricultural sector, and I know this slide is quite busy, but just if we focus on the 1990 and on the 2022, you see there in the blue that methane emissions in 1990 accounted for almost 70% of agricultural emissions, and in 2023 they now account for 72%. Whereas in terms of for nitrous oxide emissions, they have decreased from 24.5% contribution in 1990 to just over 21% in 2023. In agriculture, there was two main drivers to emission levels, and these are fertilizer nitrogen use and indeed the size of our cattle herd. With respect to the fertilizer nitrogen use decreased by 18.2% in 2023. This is following a decrease between 2021 and 2022 as well. As a result, fertilizer nitrogen use has reduced by 31% in the period 2021 to 2022. In terms of the cattle herd then, and this graphic just to represent the change since 1990, we are now 17.7% higher dairy cow numbers than we did in 1990, and indeed they've increased by 42.5% over the last 10 years. And with respect to the other cattle, herd, they are now 4.3% above 1990, having increased from 5.48 million head to 5.74 million head in 2023. On the transport side, we've seen a minor increase in transport emissions in 2023, and emissions are now 4.3% below pre-COVID levels. Of note, within the transport sector, 23% of new car registrations in 2023 were electric vehicles, either fully electric or plug-in hybrids. And that now means that in 2023 there was 110,000 EVs overall on Irish roads. Of further note, with respect to 2023, there's a significant increase in biofuel in blends in petrol and diesel, and it is estimated that the increase in biofuels has saved 0.8 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions. Also of note as well is that public transport use of public transport also increased in 2023, which has moderated any increases in the transport sector. I suppose it's useful then to put this into context, and here is a graph representing petrol, diesel, LPG and biofuel use in the transport sector. You'll note that there was a minor reduction, or a reduction from 122 to 121 petajoules of in terms of diesel in the transport sector, and an increase from 29 to 31 for petrol. Since 2005, you see there in the green, relatively small proportion in terms of that represents the biofuels, but since 2005, cumulative biofuel savings of 6.4 million tonnes have been estimated. On the energy industry side then, we've seen a significant decrease in the energy industries, the main subsector here being electricity generation. This is as a result of 44% reduction in coal, 78% reduction in oil, a third of a reduction in peat, and 7% in natural gas. However, a renewable share increased from 39% to 41% in 2023, and as previously mentioned, imported electricity in 2023 accounted for 9.5% of electricity demand. This was a 12-fold increase from the previous year. And that overall emissions in 2023 from the energy industry sector were 30.8% below 1990 levels. When we look at the pattern of fuel for electricity generation over the period 1990 to 2023, you can see the significant changes that have occurred. And as I mentioned, that renewables account for approximately 41% of electricity generation in 2023, with natural gas accounting for 44.3%. And that's coal, oil and peat generation, in terms of proportion, have decreased to 4.6% of the electricity generation, down from 10.9% in the previous year. As a result of the changes in fuel profile used for electricity generation, and also as a result of interconnector electricity being used to meet electricity demand in 2023, we're now at the lowest value in terms of the CO2 intensity of electricity generation, having dropped from 332 grams per kilowatt 332 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour to 255 grams in 2023. On the residential side then, we've seen a 7.1% reduction in residential emissions. The second reduction, or continued reduction in emissions over the last 2 years, driven mainly by high fuel prices, solid fuel regulation, as mentioned earlier, and milder winter. In terms of the specifics, coal use reduced by 22%, peat by 13%, with similar amounts of kerosene, and natural gas reduced by 14%. As alluded to earlier, with milder winters, there were 6.2% less heating degree days in 2023 than in 2022. And you'll also notice the peak there in 2010 during the big freeze, where we reached a peak of 8.8 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2010, and are now sitting below 5 million tons. What does that mean then in terms of the tons of CO2 equivalent per household? Well, as you can see here in this graph, we're now at the lowest level over the full time series, having reduced from 7.5 million ton, or 7.5 tons of CO2 equivalent per household in 1990 to 2.8 million tons in 2023. And this is as a result of fuel switching from coal and peat to oil and natural gas, but also in terms of improvements in building regs and the adoption of heat pumps, as discussed earlier. However, there is a need for increased energy efficiency retrofit activity in order to achieve further emission reductions in the sector. Briefly, then, in terms of land use change in forestry. For the land use and land use change in forestry sector, what we've adopted here for our provisional estimates is the projected estimate for 2023 from our recent projections publication. This is forecasting that emissions from the sector will increase by approximately 40% as a result of the age profile of our forests and increased harvest. And finally, then, in terms of the remaining sectors of the inventory, emissions from manufacturing combustion sector decreased by 4.6%, or 0.2 million tons in 2023. There were decreases in combustion emissions across all of the major subsectors, including non-ferrous metals, chemicals, food processing, etc., ranging from just over 3.5% to almost 6% reduction in the subsectors. On the industrial processes side, the largest sector here is cement production, where we've seen a decrease of 5.8%, or 0.13 million tons of CO2 in 2023, following a 7.4% decrease in 2022. In terms of the waste sector, emissions decreased by 4% in 2023, largely as a result of a decrease in emissions from methane from landfills. In terms of the fluorinated gases, or the F gases, in 2023, these were down by 5.7%. The main factor here being a reduction in the use of these fluorinated gases in the semiconductor industry. And on the commercial services and public services sector, then we've seen a decrease of 2.5% and 2.7%, respectively, where natural gas use decreased by 5.7%. However, there was a slight increase of 2.5% in heating oil or kerosene use within these sectors. And just to finish, the information that has just been presented in this webinar is now available up on the EPA website on the greenhouse gas emissions section. Thank you all.